Gasoline prices have been surging since April of 2020 when the initial shock of the pandemic drove prices under $1.80 a gallon. They hit $3 in May of 2021 and cruised past $4 this March. Now, the nationwide average ticked up to $5 on Saturday, and in states like California, prices are up to over $6 a gallon. What's causing these rising prices and what impact does it have on all of us, our travel, our jobs, the housing market, and just our everyday lives? This is what we're asking our experts this morning. My first guest is Dr. Julianne Malveaux. She is President Emerita of Bennett College for Women. She's also an economist. She's an author. She's a commentator whose popular writings have appeared in USA Today, Black Issues in Higher Education, Ms. Magazine, Essence Magazine, The Progressive, and many more. Dr. Malveaux is a dean at Cal State LA, and she's also the author of Are We Better Off? Good morning and welcome back, Dr. Malveaux. I know you wear a lot of hats, but at your core, you are an economist. So help us understand what is going on with these rising gas prices. Like I said, in California, prices are over $6 a gallon at so many stations.
I've seen $7 gas here in California. If you come back from the airport, that's where people are turning their rental cars. I saw gas a couple weeks ago at $7.55.
Oh my goodness. That's higher than the $6 that I've been paying. Oh,
it's very, very crazy out there. And all the reasons Joe Biden didn't have anything to do with this. So we're not going to blame President Biden. The fact is that he has no power over this. He's releasing some of our oil reserves daily to try to bring prices down. It's not going to help. It's going to help a little bit, but it's not going to help much. The fact is that Ukraine is a huge issue, but the price gouging that's coming from the oil companies is something we also have to pay attention to. Their stock prices were soaring until yesterday when, of course, we saw a big bump. But when we look at some of the gas companies, Mobil, others, they are seeing record stock prices. So people who own stock in those companies are making a lot of money. Do they have to charge as high prices as they are? No. But guess what? We live in a predatory capitalist society where in predatory capitalism, people's job is to maximize profit. That's their job, to make sure that their investors get the best return on investment as possible. Now, there are ways that, we could get around that. They could say, well, we're going to do the best, but under the circumstances, some states have suspended, Areva, the state gasoline tax, which is no more any time than 40 or 50 cents a gallon. But if you're paying $6.50, 50 cents makes a difference. A lot of people are really having to change their vacation plans. Airline ticket prices are going up because, of course, gasoline is a part of that as well. The economic situation is extraordinarily unstable, not only because of gasoline prices, but also because of inflation. We expect the Fed to increase the interest rate by 0.75 today, or not today, sometime in the next week or so. And when interest rates go up, what does that mean? It means housing prices, it's more difficult to buy a house. It means that rental costs are also going to go up. And so every way you turn, essentially what we're getting is ordinary consumers being hit. And there's not a whole lot that you could do about it. There's a great op-ed today in the Washington Post by our amazing CEA, Council of Economic Advisors chair, who's a sister, she and Marty Walsh, the Secretary of Labor, Cecilia Rouse is her name, and Marty Walsh, Secretary of Labor, have written a piece saying, the administration is doing the right things and there's not a lot we can do. We got to write it out. They're basically writing it out, and they're looking at employment and saying, for the first time in a long time, Black male unemployment has gone up. Not unemployment, employment. Black male employment has gone up. So it's going down, down, down. In some cities are even less than 50% of brothers employed. And now that is turning around. So the Biden administration has done the right thing around employment, but these other forces, and no one anticipated Ukraine, Russia, any of that, those forces are out of the president's control.
Okay, Dr. Malvo, you answered like all of my questions in that response. So I got to go back. I had to take notes. I got to go back now and unpack all of these incredible responses. And I think the most important one you just told us is it's not Joe Biden's fault because we know he is getting blamed and people are angry at him and they're blaming him and they're blaming the vice president and his administration. And that's just wrong. So we know the Democrats and the Biden administration, Biden-Harris administration have to do a better job of doing exactly what you just did, which is make it known. It doesn't matter if the guy with the yellow or orange skin was sitting in the office. These economic factors are not dependent on who's in the White House, and the president is not to blame. But let's talk about Ukraine for a minute. We have a foreign conflict expert that's going to come on after you, but I do want to talk about the Ukraine. Is it just the invasion itself, or is it the sanctions that are, which is impacting these oil prices?
Well, it's the sanctions more than anything else, because the sanctions essentially are also connected to some European countries saying they won't use Russian oil. Now, Russia produces a fair amount of oil. Here's something that, and I hope your foreign policy expert can deal with it, but what if we pressured or asked nicely some of the Middle Eastern countries to pump more oil? If they pump more to substitute for the oil that some European countries are not taking from Russia, that would have a useful downward pressure on prices as well. But you made a good point that I just want to take a minute to follow up on about messaging. When you talk about the Biden-Harris administration, they are amazing. We all know some of them and appreciate their work, but they do a very poor job at messaging. Karine Jean-Pierre is one of the best in the business, but I don't think she's been given the rope to do the messaging that needs to be done. They need to fight back. I don't understand why Democrats allow Republicans to run roughshod over them and do nothing, say nothing, and instead of fighting back. I mean, the orange orangutan, you call him orange, I just call it the orange orangutan. He had a messaging system that was flawed but perfect. Flawed in that they told lies, but if you tell a lie often enough, people start to believe it. How come we can't tell the truth that often? How come Democrats can't say again and again and again, this is what's going on, this is what's happening? How come some of the people who are holding stock in Mobil and these other gas companies can't say to them, look, we want to maximize profits, but we also want our fellow Americans to have opportunities. So I think the messaging is at the heart of this, because come November, we know what's going to happen. Unless the Biden-Harris administration gets control of the messaging, we're going to be shellacked. Democrats are going to be shellacked.
Yeah, that's definitely what a lot of pundits are expecting. Let's go back to the gouging too for a minute, Dr. Malvo. Can the government, you mentioned that some states are doing something in terms of eliminating its tax on gas to reduce the price, but can the government do anything about this price gouging? Because, we're happy for those shareholders and we understand this predatory capitalist society that we live in, but this is so unfair to the everyday American that doesn't own stock in Mobil or some of these other, Exxon, these big oil companies. Are we just helpless? Can they raise the prices to $10 a gallon? What stops them from just, doubling and tripling the existing price?
Well, the last time we tried price controls was in the 70s when we had a serious inflationary challenge under, I believe it was Richard Nixon. I was a baby then, so I wasn't reading the stock stuff, but there was enormous political pushback to price controls. So the government could attempt price controls. It would take a long time unless there was political consensus, which, as you know, these days, political consensus is about as rare as, anything you can think of. Political consensus doesn't happen. It would be turned into a partisan issue. Democrats could attempt it, but it'd be turned partisan. And of course, what words would be used. It's communistic or socialist, or, we're trying to interfere in the free market. So it'll be extraordinarily difficult for the federal government to do anything. We could suspend the federal gas tax, as well as many states have done. That would probably take the gas price down, I don't know, to maybe, 75 cents a gallon, which would be significant. That would also require legislation. And right now we're in legislative gridlock. So anything we try to do around legislation is probably not going to happen. So
So,
what we
so can these companies, though, Professor Malvo, could they, raise the prices to $10 a gallon, $12 a gallon?
they thought if they with a free market, with quotes around the word free, if they thought the market could bear it, they would. And as you see, as I said, the place in LA, it's right outside the airport. You're returning your rental car, you want to return it full because otherwise you get charged $12, $15. So you go to the closest gas station. If it's $7.55 is better than whatever the car company is going to. So if they think the market will bear it. Now, there's a whole lot of consumer activism around this. There are a couple websites. I wish I'd written them down. I hadn't, but there are a couple websites where people can find cheaper gas, and in there you can put your zip code in, and they will tell you where there's cheaper gas. And people are turning into smart consumers. We have to be.
Can we pressure these companies? You talk about consumer activism. That's great that there are some websites that help people find cheaper gas. But is there anything we can do as consumers to put pressure on these CEOs and these chairmen, mostly chairmen,
mostly men,
the boards of these oil companies to cause them to stop gouging us at the pump?
We have seen a history of these people being indifferent to consumer activism, but there's somebody out there who's probably going to do it. I know that this weekend, Reverend William Barber is having his moral march in Washington, D.C. on Saturday, and I know that this is going to be part of the issue. In the first 100 minutes of his march and rally, individuals, ordinary people will talk. Usually at a rally, you've got the big names. You've got, Reverend Jackson, Reverend Sharpton, union leaders. But this time it's going to be people. So as these people talk about how these prices, inflation, all this has affecting them, I'm hoping that there will be those in this group. And I know Reverend Barber is one of the best organizers I know. But I'm hoping that the oil companies will be listening and watching and responding to what consumers are saying. But we are pinched. We are hurting. Yeah. This is hard.
I think some of those websites, my producer was able to find them, Gas Buddy, Gas Guru, and even MapQuest can show gas prices in your area so you can get some kind of comparative analysis. Airlines, let's talk about that, Dr. Malvo. The prices of an airline ticket right now, outrageous. Tickets that used to be $400 to fly across country from LA to New York, now $800, $900 for a coach seat for a trip. They literally was half the price. The airlines got all kinds of money during the economic bailout because of COVID. Where is that money? And why are the airline tickets so high?
Areva, COVID became a ripoff and a profit-making opportunity for a whole lot of people, not only airlines. Reverend Barber and I were talking yesterday about a tire company that took millions in COVID relief and has not given their workers a penny. In fact, chosen to lay people off when they have had to become injured. One woman said she threw, and I can't imagine, but threw 700 tires a day. Her shoulder went out. They told her, come to work or you're fired. So all these companies have been benefiting from COVID, but the people have not. We did COVID relief very quickly, and it was not necessarily properly structured. The question was whether we want to take the time to structure or the pace to get the money out there. And I'd say that 85% of the money got to the right places, but that 15% that didn't was how many billions of dollars. The airlines also have been ripping people off. Frankly, they saw their profits drop during COVID. We stopped traveling. But now we're traveling. They're trying to make it up. Not only airlines, let's talk hotels. I don't know a hotel that I stayed at a year ago, and it was $179. It was like, I won't call the company's name because they'll probably call me and yell at me. But it was $179. It was one of like a airport hotel, one of them Yotel motels that I had planned to stay at overnight. Now it's $259. In the course of over the course of a year, basically. And
should we assume the hotels, like the airlines, and a lot of industries, not just hotels and airlines, are trying to make up for the economic loss that they saw?
Exactly what's happening. That's exactly what's happening. They're trying to make it up, but they don't understand. And here's the problem, though, Areva. Right now, consumers have not pulled back on their spending. People didn't spend for 2 years. They spent differently, but a lot of people didn't spend. So you have people who have money. They haven't been on vacation for 2 years. They're going on vacation. It costs more, but they're going to go on vacation. They're going to cut some corners. I have a friend who said all of their kids are going to be staying in one room. So it's she, her husband, and 3 kids. I'm like, oh, y'all gonna stay in one room? She said, we can't afford. Usually we put the kids in one room, we stay in another one. Like, okay, there goes your sex life. But in any case, they're all going to stay in one room. But they still are determined to go on vacation. People are spending, many of us who've gone back to work haven't bought new clothes. You know, we bought athleisure, I think they call it now, athleisure, sweats and stuff. Now you want a new suit to go to work. So people are still spending. And that's why we have the inflationary pressure, because even though you see prices going up, people are still saying, I'm going to spend. Maybe I'll spend less. Maybe I'll buy cheaper things, but I am going to spend. And so we're fueling some of the inflation ourselves.
So simple supply and demand. I'm not an economist, but I have an undergraduate degree in economics from a pretty good school that I think you would respect. So we need to pull back on our demand, is what you're saying, as consumers. And that will send a message to these retailers and these airline industries. And it may drive down some of the prices, because as long as we're in this spending frenzy, as you said, coming back out of COVID, there's no pressure on companies because the demand is so great.
If you looked at it during COVID, if you tried to buy an airline ticket, they were just about giving them to you for free.
Yes.
Just about.
Fly first class across country for under $1,000, which was unheard of.
Precisely. And now, it's the last time I looked, I'm going to D.C. later on today. I'm flying coach because first is $3,341. No, thank you. But basically, the market responds to us. And when we choose to pull back on spending, then the market responds to us. The challenge with us pulling back, on one hand, is that does that push us into a recession? Because, our economy, 2/3 of our economy is based on consumer spending. It's based on the money that we spend. And so if we don't spend, the economy spirals down. At the same time, with prices going up, 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 many of us can't afford to spend. It's an economic conundrum that I think, the Fed is going to be grappling with in these next few weeks.
And you mentioned that the Fed is about to increase interest rate by 0.75. Is that to try to cool the market off, like the housing market we know in California in particular? I read an article that literally sellers were getting 20 and 25 offers on a home. Most of those offers, $50,000 and above, even the asking price. And now they say that because of the interest rates that have risen, those 20 to 25 offers are now 3 to 5 offers. Still, many of them over asking price. So is that what the Feds are trying to do with this increase in interest rates, is to try to, kind of even out the market?
They're trying to cool down demand. So if you're buying a house, your bank is going to offer, depending on your income and everything, you're going to get a different interest rate offer based on all the things that you have to deal with. And so a year ago, I'm kicking myself. I'm trying to refinance, but I'm trifling. And so I didn't finish the paperwork on time. Now I'm looking up and the guys are like, well, yeah, you can still refinance, but at 7%. I'm like, oh, no, thank you. I'll keep the little 4%, that I have. I was hoping to go down to 3%. But that's not going to happen. And that's kind of what's happening. And at 3, my payments would have been lower. So at 4, they were manageable. At 8, I couldn't do it. And that's what every person who's trying to buy a home is dealing with, is if you have to pay a higher interest rate, your payment is going to be higher. You can afford less. Now, many, as you say, many are going to be able to hang in there, but most will not be able to hang in there. And so the Fed is trying to make sure that, interest rates are the price of money. They're trying to make money more expensive. And if money is more expensive, then people, when they spend, they have to do more. The thing that concerns me more than the housing market, though, Areva, is the people who are determined to spend and who are racking up credit card debt. And credit card interest rates are going up as well. They were pretty manageable, but now they're going up. And you're seeing, if you get people, please check your statements and see what your interest rate is, and do all the things you're supposed to do to be a good consumer. But understand that, if you're going to spend and you're going to spend on a credit card, you're going to pay more. So the $100 that you spend at the store is really $108 or maybe even $116 if you have the wrong interest rate.
Right. Explain to us, Professor Malvo, what the Consumer Confidence Index means, and where is that index now?
The consumer confidence index really speaks to what people think is going to happen, how they feel about the economy. I don't have the number right in front of me, but it has been wavering and falling. So people are feeling uncertain about the economy. And that's what we're seeing in terms of the stock market tumbling. Yesterday, 1,000-point loss in the Dow. That's almost unheard of. But it's like none of this is science. It's art and projection. So then you can't say something happened yesterday to make this Dow go down. What you have to say is people are feeling less certain about the economy. In a bull market, people are feeling good. In a bear market, people are feeling like, let me hold on to what I have. And that's where we are.
Let's talk about jobs. Biden's job report numbers have been incredible.
Yes,
They've been the most favorable that we've seen in history. Lowest unemployment rates, even as you said, amongst African American males. I think unemployment is now around 3.6%. He being Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, have added 8.7 million new jobs, which is an all-time record. So if you have more people working, and including African Americans whose unemployment rate is pretty stubborn, how does that factor into what we're seeing as it relates to these higher gas prices, airline tickets, hotel rooms, and all the things that we've talked about that are more expensive now for the multiple factors that you've identified, but yet more people are working?
More people are working, but at what wage are they working? While we have more jobs, and that's exciting and it's really great, at the same time, what we saw is wages rise by about 5%, but inflation rise by about 8%. That means that you're basically about 3% in the hole. Now, that's kind of simplistic, and you go by category. Obviously, with gas, it's different. But the fact is that people are working, but at what wages? You can't go anywhere. You know, we're both in LA, and you can't walk down the street on Wilshire or someplace without seeing help wanted jobs signs in the coffee shops, in the restaurants, in the retail stores. But if they're paying 15, 18 an hour, that's decent, but it's not great. And basically, retailers and others are reluctant to raise their wages too rapidly. And so a lot of people are also, even though there are more jobs, a lot of people are staying home. They're like, I'm not working for X an hour. And
that's a good point, Dr. Melville. After COVID, we saw a lot of people, the great resignation. What's happening now? Even though those job rates are so low, you still, as you said, you see so many companies. You go to a restaurant and they're understaffed. You go to a hotel, they're understaffed. People can't find enough people to work. But we know those.
You go to the hospital and they're understaffed. I had a friend who waited in an emergency room for 12 hours because they did not have people to clean the rooms to let more people in. So no matter where but you can deal with, employers can deal with that by paying people more. It's real simple. It's not rocket science. If you're offering 18 and people aren't taking it, try 20 or try 22. But again, these are profit maximizers. They want to pay people as little as they can, and that's why we have the shortages. And you have a lot of interesting kind of compromises people are making in terms of, self-service in restaurants, or, waiting longer, or all kind of things. But employers can solve this by paying people more. It's real simple. Just pay people more or provide them with more benefits. Some employers have been extremely creative. They're not going to pay you more, but they may pay for your college. They may give you flexible hours. And a lot of women in particular, but not only women, some men as well, want flexible hours. They don't want the Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. They want to know that they get some flexibility. So employers are going to have to be creative if they want to keep people working. Now, you got the Googles and the tech companies of the world that have people working at home, working hybrid schedules. But when you're talking about a teacher, a nurse, people are prepared to offer them that same kind of flexibility.
Last question for you, Dr. Malvo. You said that our experts at the White House, Marty Walsh and Cecilia Rouse, have said, sorry, not our fault. We've got to ride this out. Are we talking a month? Are we talking 6 months? Are we talking 2 years? Like, what is the time frame? Because I think people, if they know psychologically, they can prepare themselves. If this is going to be a short-term situation, but give us some parameters so we can get ready emotionally and psychologically to deal with these $7 gas prices and these $2,000 airline tickets?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball. I would say that we're talking about at least a year. I would say that just based on the fact that prices are sticky downward, upward, which means once a price is established, $7 gas, it's going to take a while for it to go down to, let's say, 6 or 5. It's going to take a minute. They're not going to, the embargo with Russia stops. It's not going to be tomorrow, which is really kind of messed up from the perspective of some of these companies already have the gas. They paid less for it, but they're charging us more for it. But it's not going to be overnight. It's going to be very challenging, and people just have to keep their eye on the prize, because basically Republicans, and I don't want to make it partisan, but you know me, I will. Republicans are going to say this is Biden's fault. All this inflation is Biden's fault, and then people are going to go into the voting booth in November saying it's Biden's fault, so I'm going to vote Republican. What are you getting by voting Republican? Do you think Republicans are going to provide you with economic relief? No, because they are the kings and queens of the profit maximizers. I mean, I think that, what's her name? Zoe Glofman, here from California, was brilliant when she talked about the grifter who basically extracted $250 million from people, so supposedly to fight.
Lot. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so if people are discerning, they will say, I'm not voting for the grifter and his team. But people are emotional, especially when it comes to their pocketbook. If you just filled up your gas tank, I borrowed a friend's car a couple of weeks ago, filled up her tank, $70. I mean, I haven't bought gas in forever because I don't have a car, but I was like, what the what? And if you just did that and then went to vote, your emotions are going to say, I'm not voting for
those guys out. Let me try anybody but these guys. You're right. And people do vote their pocketbook. And that's why it's so important that we have these discussions and that we educate people about the causes, because changing the bodies aren't going to change these global economic things that are happening worldwide, which are not controlled by any individual in the White House. And you're right. Look at the team. And we know the team grifter is not the team that's going to benefit people, everyday people, working people. So glad you're going to be there with Reverend Barber. He is such a jewel to our community, to our country, and the work that he does around the Poor People's Campaign is just so invaluable, and continuing to lift those voices and call out these corporate executives who are making record profit themselves. Wages of executives have gone
exponentially. A year, $134 million a year, one of them, $134 million a year.
Yeah.
While their workers are making the minimum wage. So that's crazy.
We have to keep calling it out. May not change overnight, but we got to keep our foot on the pedal, as they say, on the gas pedal in this case. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Malvo. Have a great trip back east, and keep doing the great work you're doing. And we'll have you back because I always learn so much from sitting down and talking with you.
Well, thank you, Areva, and continue your great work as well.
Oh, thank you. All right. Dr. Malvo raised the issue about Ukraine and what's happening internationally. And so I'm excited to be talking to my next guest. Her name is Claire Finkelstein, and she is a professor of law at the University of Pennsylvania, and she's an expert on foreign conflicts. And we've had her on before talking about Russia's invasion of the Ukraine and what it means for Americans. Good morning and welcome back, Dr. Finkelstein.
Thanks for having me, Areva, as always.
So our economist, Dr. Malvo, said that some of the issues around these rising gas prices has to do with the invasion of Russia and also of the Ukraine, and some of the European countries not willing to buy gas from oil, I should say, from Russia, and these sanctions. Help us understand how all of these things kind of, in combination are impacting U.S. gas prices.
Well, I agree with Dr. Malvo, Areva, that Ukraine is not the only factor. It is, she's right, the primary factor that is driving these rising gas and oil prices. And, Western Europe's dependence on Russian oil and gas has been much, much higher than that of the U.S. So you can imagine where President Biden is concerned about replacing domestic losses of Russian oil and gas, where our degree of dependence on Russia was much, much lower. As Western Europe tries to wean itself from Russian oil and gas because of the conflict in Ukraine, it's having a much harder time than we are reducing that dependence. Germany, in particular, has been the primary consumer of Russian oil and gas. France is less dependent, partly because of its embrace of nuclear energy, something that the opposition in Germany has made more difficult. Germany has gone in a different direction, but its dependence on Russian oil and gas has been up over 50%, more like on the order of 55% of its total energy consumption. And so Europe was very slow, with Germany really being in opposition. One of the crazy things that people don't realize is that Ukraine itself consumes Russian oil and gas. After the invasion of Crimea in 2014, Ukraine said, we're not going to buy Russian oil and gas anymore. But guess where they buy it from? The major pipelines to carry Russian gas go right through Ukraine. Most of them do. And Germany buys that gas, and now Ukraine buys a lot of its gas from Germany, which is the same gas that is coming from Russia. So even Ukraine has difficulty weaning itself from Russian gas, but it won't buy it from Russia anymore. It's still the same gas.
So Dr. Malvo said I should ask you about putting some subtle pressure on the Saudis, Venezuela, maybe even Iran, to help pick up the slack for the drop.
This is really the only thing that I disagreed with Dr. Malvo about, because we have been really capture to petro dictators long enough, and we have been coddling the Saudis for years and years and years because of our dependence on Saudi oil in particular, but oil and gas. So we have tried in recent years, particularly after the murder of Jamil Khashoggi, to reduce our dependence and to reduce the degree to which we really are constant supplicants and live in constant fear of displeasing the Saudis. We've made some good progress in recent years in distancing ourselves from the Saudis. And now to see President Biden, who next month will take a trip to Saudi Arabia. Now, the administration is saying the purpose of that trip is not energy related, but that's very difficult to believe, especially after the trip to Venezuela, which really had the same purpose. Number of people are quite critical of this approach, myself included. I think this would be the moment, given that we have rather significant domestic production of.
Well, let me ask you about that. I was going to ask you about, because we know some Republicans are calling on Biden to help increase domestic oil production, but they're being met with opposition by Democrats and by environmentalists who say that by increasing domestic oil production, we are undercutting efforts around climate change.
Right. Well, here's the thing. It's going to come from somewhere, right? Our choices are domestic oil and gas, foreign oil and gas, and reduction in need. And we are going to have to get with the program. European countries and the EU have been much more focused on environmental progress than the US has been. We're an incredibly wasteful nation. And this is a moment for President Biden to really seize the reins on climate change and climate control and say, we are going to use this as an opportunity to change our habits, change our patterns, and reduce our consumption.
What would that look like, Professor Finkelstein?
Well,
if that was a national directive, what would it look like for everyday people?
There would be many, many different parts of it. And I will say, in defense of the Biden administration on this, they have already taken very good steps in the environmental direction. But you don't see President Biden at this moment with soaring gas prices leading with that message, right? That's not a popular message. But what would be involved in doing that? Well, number one, for example, Europe is increasing its subsidies for people who install green measures, passive housing measures, measures that reduce consumption inside the home. That may involve replacing windows and doors to make them more energy efficient. That may mean installing solar panels. There are a lot of different ways in which you can reduce your carbon footprint at home. And we don't see a lot of emphasis on those measures, the same kind of emphasis that we see in Europe. The U.S.
Do you know, Professor, how quickly the U.S. this conversion from using cars? Cars are obviously one of the biggest consumers of oil and gas. How quickly the plan is to move us away from those cars that use oil and gas to electric vehicles? Like, what's the plan? Like, how soon will we get there?
I think it's a slow walk, and I'm not an energy policy expert, so I need to back down off some of this, Areva. But the conversion to electric, in my view, is going to be slow. And the way to do it, of course, the most likely way to do it is with incentives, not with mandates. And that's something that the Biden administration can really do on its own without Congress. By giving tax rebates and other sorts of credits for people and businesses that are willing to adopt much greener measures. So with the degree of dependence on foreign oil and gas that we have here in the U.S., we're comparably in a good position compared to Western Europe, which does not have the same level of production. And I just think to continue to make ourselves dependent on and a supplicant to these petro dictatorships like Saudi Arabia, like Venezuela, in order to be able to maintain a fairly wasteful series of habits. Rather than really putting the emphasis in changing our practices and our habits. And
so you see it.
Independence is a mistake.
So some see this, as you just said, the choice between relying on foreign oil production or utilizing, increasing the domestic production and saying to the environmentalists, this is temporary. This is the lesser of evils. It's better for us to rely on this domestic production now as we try to get to this less, wasteful place that you're suggesting that we go as a country versus continuing to rely on these foreign dictators. Is that a message that you think Democrats, or in particular, are ready to absorb and to embrace?
I think it's possible, Areva, because there is so much support for Ukraine in this country. It's really interesting. I've just come from a long stay in France, and while the support in Western Europe is very high for Ukraine, it's nothing compared to what's going on in this country. I've been so proud of my countrymen in this one respect. With all the bad things going on out there, I've been really proud and pleased to see the way public opinion has rallied around Ukraine and how this has not been a highly partisan issue. You don't see people speaking out in favor of Russia in this conflict in this country by and large. The number of Ukrainian flags that you see driving around every day is just extraordinary. And I think President Biden deserves a lot of credit for that. He's really helped to shore up public opinion. There's been fantastic news coverage coming from the U.S. Into the conflict and the nature of the conflict. And I think we really have as a country, I hope, learned our lesson on Russia and learned what the passivity around the 2014 invasion of Crimea um, taught us, and what it has brought us in terms of being able to push back against Russia, possibly too little, too late. So
What is the status now, Professor, of the invasion? Like, where is, Russia's efforts to, you know, acclaim Ukraine as a part of its country now? What's the status of it? And two, if Ukraine is successful in beating Russia back, will that impact these oil prices?
Well, that's a really good question that you ask, Areva. So imagine right now the situation is that Ukraine is making some progress in the south, it says, but the east of the country has been hugely problematic, where Russia has made enormous gains, and many people feel that Ukraine's ability to hang on is very, very tenuous, especially as it says that it is not receiving nearly enough in terms of weaponry from Western powers. But let's fast forward and imagine that Ukraine is able ultimately to prevail, or at least that there is a peace agreement ultimately that may cede some portions, existing portions, the Donbass and other, possibly allow Russia to keep some of its gains in order to end the war. What then? Because you can't imagine that 10 minutes later there's going to be a willingness on the part of the EU and the US to resume Russian oil and gas purchases. One really interesting question is whether or not the sanctions that have been imposed, whether or not a deal that the US might be able to help put in place to resume such purchases and to lift the sanctions could play an important role in possibly striking a deal to end the war. But assuming that the world, that NATO powers and the EU in particular are going to be making efforts to wean themselves more permanently from Russia, what happens in the long run? I think we can see that going back to business as usual with Russia would be just to put ourselves in the same, and Ukraine in the same position that we were in after Crimea, and it strengthens Russia enormously and weakens our ability to oppose its atrocious human rights violations and war crimes and lack of recognition for the independent sovereign nations that surround it, if we just start buying up all that oil and gas again.
Hmm.
So it's a mistake. We need to wean ourselves permanently
Right.
from Russian energy sources and to find a long-term solution that will allow us to be politically independent as well as economically independent.
Well, I hope the powers that be are listening to you when you talk about, a long-term strategy and not just settling for a short-term solution to a problem that has long-term implications. Thank you so much, Professor Feigelstein, for joining me this morning. Always a pleasure. Learn so much when I talk with you. Uh, no quick answers to this, I think, is what I've learned from both you and Professor Malvo, is that I guess Marty Walsh has it correct when he says we've got to just ride this out. Some good things are happening based on what you've said, but we've got to be patient. Look forward to having you back as we continue this discussion and continue to look at how we get back to a point in this country where people don't feel like they've got to, mortgage their house to pay gas to get on the road to take a family vacation this summer. But again, thank you so much for joining me, Professor.
Thanks for having me, Areva.
All right, we're going to shift gears for a minute. We're going to talk about what everyone is waiting for, at least everyone in the legal community, everyone in the reproductive health community, and that is that much anticipated decision from the U.S. Supreme Court on Roe v. Wade. There was some expectation that we would get the decision perhaps this week. We know the Supreme Court likes to drop decisions on Mondays and Thursdays. Today is Wednesday, so there is still some possibility that we will get that decision tomorrow. We know that that leak decision suggests that the Supreme Court is ready to overturn Roe v. Wade and to really impact millions of people across this country, women, girls, families who have relied on their constitutional right to this date to take control over their own reproductive health. And the decision, the anticipation of this decision has lots of folks really, really worried. I'm going to check in with one of the experts that I've relied on as we've been covering this story. Her name is Marsha Jones. She's the co-founder and executive director of the Afaya Center in North Texas, and she's been on the ground with this fight, with the activists fighting for our reproductive rights and reproductive justice in this country. I think we have her now. Good morning, Marsha. How are you?
I'm great.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know you got a lot going on. All the activists do. But just wanted to check in with you to see how are you thinking about what may come down in terms of this decision. It may be tomorrow, Thursday. It might be Monday of next week. But is there a level of anxiety in the reproductive justice community over the ultimate decision coming down one day soon?
So first, I want to say thank you for always reaching out to us and allowing us this opportunity to talk about one of the things that's so very important to us at the Afia Center. But yes, there is a bit of anxiety, if I would speak for a collective body of folk. But for me, one of the things that I'm trying to do at the Afia Center is say, hey, one, we know that this is happening. We don't know when, but we know that it is happening. Let's take a moment, let's breathe. And let's do something that Black women generally don't do. Whatever that decision is, let's stop and pause for a minute. Let's stop and pause and then move. And don't be so quick to just, it happens, we run and we move. Because if we continue to do that, we won't be here very long doing this work, because this is a long fight. One of the things I've been saying to my team, y'all, this is a long fight. I believe we can win, but we won't win tomorrow. This is a long fight. How do we focus on making sure that we are meeting the needs of the women that we are going to have to serve? Because this will mean, on some level, more children will be born with no social system in place to take care of that. This will also exacerbate an already ridiculous number of maternal mortality deaths among Black women. This will increase unemployment. This will feed into our criminal justice system. There are so many ways that this can harm the folk that we serve. So right now, to keep our anxiety level down so much at the Afia Center, and I'm not going to say there's not a little angst here, because I went to get my teeth cleaned this morning. They did my blood pressure check, and I was like, whoa, that's a little high. So there's a little angst here, but just staying focused on the goal. Just staying committed to the people that we serve, and letting the people who are voting and letting the people who are making these decisions, we are not letting them off, not one bit. And we're going to continue to be in the streets, letting them know the actual harm that's going to happen here.
No, and I love to hear you say that you're telling people to take a breath, to pause, and not to be so reactionary, because what we do in this moment has long-term implications. And we've got to make sure that when we strike, that the time is right and that we are strategic with how we are responding. I just want to give a shout out to a couple of groups that I know are going to be on this issue over the weekend. Black Bodies for Black Power. They have 2 days of action that are planned in Washington, D.C., designed to, again, discuss and bring attention to the whole reproductive justice issue, to talk about Black women and Black women in liberation. And they have a really cool toolkit that was shared with me this morning on my Instagram page, and I told them that I would shout it out and share it. So this Juneteenth, they're using that as an opportunity to really raise these issues. And I know lots of other groups around the country are going to use Juneteenth, Marsha, to really talk about issues of reproductive justice and how they impact African American women in particular. So is there anything happening in the Dallas area, in the Texas area, around Juneteenth this weekend to address some of these issues?
So I'm super amped about that. I am absolutely in love with the group of women who are doing this. We will be at NDC. The Affair Center will be there with them, elevating this conversation with our team. And we have been a part of. We've been a part of those conversations. I will not be there. I will not be there. I will not be speaking. Will not be doing any of that this weekend. I'm going to do what I promote, and I'm going to do some self-care, even at this critical moment. I'm going to do some self-care. We've been fortunate enough that we have an amazing staff at the Affair Center. We have an amazing staff of folk who are directly impacted by what's happening. And those are the voices that need to be heard also. So we will be there. We will be elevating that. We'll be lifting it up. I will be on the other spectrum of reproductive justice, and that is practicing self-care. I was born and raised in a place in Dallas that was one of the very first freedmen communities, and it turns 150 years old this weekend. And so, in honor of my mother and my father, who were some of the not first, but really early on purchasers of land and homes in that area, I'm going to be there lifting up my ancestors over the weekend. But I will be. What you will know is that I will have on a T-shirt that says, "Hey sis, hey fam, abortions are still legal somewhere."
Yeah.
So,
well, I'm so glad to hear
yeah.
that you're being able to honor your ancestors, because that's so important during this weekend. So much going on this weekend. Also, there's Father's Day included. But I do want to ask you, Marsha, we've seen headlines where there are places in this country where clinics have already stopped doing abortions, even though we have no decision from the Supreme Court that has overturned Roe versus Wade. And then we also saw a synagogue in Florida challenge Florida abortion laws over religion. I don't know if you saw that headline. Did you see that headline about the synagogue?
I did not see that headline.
Yeah, they are challenging, and I think this is one of many challenges that we can expect to see. And I suspect that your team will be working with, as others around the country are going to be looking at legal challenges, assuming that Roe v. Wade is overturned. How hopeful are you? And I don't know if you've been in conversations with your legal team or been strategizing, but have you heard kind of what the strategy is going to be around a legal challenge?
I know that I would just assume that there are going to be strategies. There's going to be injunctions filed. So all kinds of stuff. So legal teams on both sides of the coin are going to be there waiting. So we do know that that's going to happen. There's going to be legal challenges on like states like Texas, where there's a 30-day, our trigger laws go into place in 30 days. But we do know that our governor, if he go according to the way he go on most things, will probably do some kind of an executive order to make that trigger law immediate. So we do know that there are going to be things to try and prevent those trigger laws from happening so soon, so that we can continue to have time to do the work that we need to do, to continue to strategize, to continue to work towards the long goal. We're looking at how we will be able to mitigate risk. Those are some of the things that we're talking to our attorneys about. How do we continue to serve as long as we can serve and not cause too much harm to the organization? So mitigating risk is going to be a really big piece that's going to sustain the work that we do, that's going to keep us here for the longer run. Of course, there are things that we just literally cannot talk about publicly, that, we at the same way we're talking to the people who are supporting the work that we do, we are also talking to people who want to be able to block the work that we do. There were conversations. I was fortunate enough to be in a space with Black RJ leaders on this past weekend as we strategize ways to move forward as Black RJ leaders in this work. And I was extremely excited about the work that's happening around the religious right to abortions. And so I'm not surprised at seeing the synagogue or whomever filing these lawsuits, because there's a right. There is a fundamental right to not having to go full term with a pregnancy that is not beneficial to no one involved. The child that you're going to force to be born, the person that you're forcing to carry it, or the community that's going to have to tend to it.
So I know
I'm excited.
I know you can't disclose everything that was said in those conversations over the weekend, but you're saying that there is some activity amongst the
Mhm.
religious right in this country that they may be filing actions or taking action to oppose the ban on abortion?
Yes, because there's a different conversation. What's so amazing this go round from the first, I would say, go around with Roe. First of all, of course, we have more resources. We have more people out there that's fighting. We have different entities that's fighting. But over the last 50 years and over these continued fights to dismantle Roe, folk from all phases of life and all aspects in all communities have been studying, have their academics, they have been really giving us a different interpretation of what the Bible really says. Looking at the original languages, what was really meant during those times. And so I think that is definitely this is going to be a game changer this time around. I think that the allies that we have sitting in the space with us this time around will look different. And back to your question, that ally that we're going to have sitting at the table with us this time, and that's going to be broader, will be those communities of faith.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you so much. Great information, great insights. Again, can't thank you enough for the work that you are doing. You're holding it up from coast to coast. You're going to be in Texas, lifting up our ancestors on Juneteenth, and your team will be in D.C. marching with those Black feminists who are going to be holding up,
Yes.
the reproductive justice issue. And I'm so glad to see that Black women now are playing such a critical role in this
Yes.
fight, because for too long we have not had our voices appropriately centered, and it has given the impression that this is a fight that we have not been in, but now to see us leading in this fight, I'm so incredibly happy about that, and just elated to see leaders like you who are also focused on building that next generation of leaders. I love that about you, and I love that you're constantly pushing your team and those younger leaders out there, giving them that space so they can grow and they can find their voices, and they can find their power, because we need them.
Yeah.
We need
Yeah.
them.
I'm super, as we end, I'm super excited. Like this weekend, after I'm sitting in the space with about 14, 15 Black women, and that's interesting because at the end of the day, there's only about 15 of us who's actually leading this work, like literally leading this work. And to sit in that space with those so much power in the space of about 48 hours was shared. So much, like, yes, we know that we're in for the fight of our life, but we also know that because of the way, the framework in which we do this work, that we have so many ways that we can win, that we can be victorious. As we look to the long win, there are some ways in which we can continue to win. And as I do celebrate my ancestors on this weekend, we can lend to our ancestors and look at the way they were able to be successful, to live and they thrived too. They didn't just live, they thrived in such adverse times. And so I'm not excited about what we're faced with, but I am encouraged because what you said a minute ago, seeing so many Black folk a part of and right in the center of this fight that we're going to be fighting for our lives. Because for those of you who think that we're only fighting for abortions, you are sadly mistaken, because there's more at stake than abortions.
Wow, such powerful words. Thank you again, Marsha. Be well. Enjoy that weekend. Your ancestors, I'm sure, are looking down and smiling because you are, as we know, Maya Angelou tells us in that phenomenal poem, that, hope in the dreams of the slave. So great work, my friend. And we'll be talking with you after this decision comes down. If it's next week or 2 weeks from now, we're definitely going to get back in touch with you, because we'd love to hear more about your response and your reaction. So again, happy Juneteenth to you, and good luck to your team that
Same
will
to
be
you.
out to DC.
Thank you so much. And I'll be looking for, if I'm not available for nobody else, I'm always available for you.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I love that. Oh my God, that makes me really happy. I'm so excited. All right, guys. Thanks to Marsha. Thanks to my two doctors that were on earlier. From gas prices to abortion rights, we're covering it all here on the special report this morning, and we're going to be watching what happens with that Roe v. Wade decision. If it doesn't come down tomorrow, It's expected to come down before the end of June. And of course, we're going to have Marcia back. We're going to have our experts back. We have our constitutional law experts to help us break it down and to talk about next steps, because we know it moves from the U.S. Supreme Court, it moves to states, and we're going to see all kinds of actions happening at the state level. We're going to see state legislators who have these trigger laws ready to go, who are going to try to ban abortion immediately. And we have the activist community that is going to be fighting back, that are not going to take this sitting down. And then we have the midterms. What impact will all of this have on the midterm election? So there's going to be so much to talk about. And, I'm going to just leave you with these words to live by. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is power, and we are trying to drop so much knowledge so you can be so powerful. Be safe out there. Remember, we're all in this together.